In this video we are going to see why your Laravel project is slow. So basically this is a very common complaint with Laravel users when their projects begin to scale. Okay, so there's a reason why your Laravel project slows down, okay, or your Laravel deployment slows down basically once it reaches a certain amount of users, or you could say a customer base you have reached, then the performance falters. Okay, so I have identified like 7 to 8 different, you could say, uh, like hidden mistakes that most developers make in this context. So we'll see what are those hidden mistakes. So first thing is the middleware bloat. So by default Laravel comes with a lot of middleware because it is a Swiss knife kind of a framework. Okay, so it has a lot of pre-built middleware. Okay, so like rate throttling is already there in Laravel. Okay, so that is one important thing is there. Then you have sessions, cookies, and also custom middlewares are also implemented in many cases. Okay, for LDAP connectivity, for something like passport or that sort of a thing. So all this extra middleware, okay, causes slowdown. So what you could do is you could apply these things selectively. Okay, so in your middleware, if you have applied it globally, because what is evident in most cases is like people apply the middleware to a group, and the whole group, or you could say it is like if there are like 30 different routes, all 30 of them have all this middleware supplied. Okay, so that tremendously affects the performance. So even in cases of rate limiters, or you could say throttling, you could use custom configs which are present in the routes.php, okay, where you can configure the rate limiter, and you can also define your custom constants as well. So that way you could have like different rate limits for different APIs, or you could say the web.php web files. Okay, so that is one thing that you should consider. And also one important thing is, do not use databases directly into your middlewares. So that is a common case when people are using their customs, you could say role-based access control solutions. So there people usually do a complete query of getting the roles or the permissions that a certain user or the person has. So authorization and all the kinds of things are checked in the middleware itself. So that is why if you're using a custom solution which you have built, then in that case make sure your logic is not DB heavy. Instead it could be something like a blend of using sessions or cookies or that sort of a thing, which could be used as an identifier immediately, and instead of a direct, you could say a long derived query. Okay, so that is one most important aspect that people should fix in their code. Secondly, what happens is people use web.php even for the APIs. So here I am talking about cases where people are having two different, you could say, projects that they maintain. Okay, in the front end they have like different types of this UI frameworks like React, Svelte, or that sort of a thing, and in the back end they have Laravel. So previously Laravel used to have something called as Lumen, okay, which was specifically meant for APIs, and that came with very less middleware. So continuing to the previous point itself, so what happens is like in this web.php you have a overhead of all the checks that are necessary for handling web pages. So like your session is there, cookies is there, and there's something called a CSRF and all those things, and this adds, you could say, an extra time, load time. Okay, so this load time affects your calls as well. So like if you what you call, your route would take, usually it would take a millisecond or a 2 millisecond time, then having all this extra overhead you would get a time of 4 milliseconds or 8 milliseconds or that sort of thing. So that is something you should look for. Okay, and in the newer version Laravel 12, as far as I can remember, I had to configure this API.php, so it wasn't really present there. So there's only web.php in the newer version, so you need to do a few changes in your routes file and add the api.php file again and exclude all the extra middleware part. So there's something like ensure token is valid or that sort of a thing is there, and the csrf is there, and also yet another session, and all those things are there. So you need to get rid of that if you're simply handling apis. Okay. And it is very common, at least in India, for people to use Laravel for the backend of Android applications or that sort of a thing. So people do build the backends on Laravel framework. So for them, this kind of tip comes handy. Okay. And the most important problem is the use of n+1 queries. Okay, so this happens because inherently people design their databases with ORM in mind. Okay, so I'm not really really a person that enjoys using ORM, but people like to write maintainable code in some aspects. So people prefer using ORM over learning SQL queries. But the inherent problem over here is they are not aware of how SQL in itself works. So that is yet another problem, because they design the whole database in terms of the object way of things. So that is why they create a very bad schema. Okay. And different types of relations. So like they consider ORM as the primary aspect and then design this thing. So they are not using any RDBMS rules or that sort of a thing. So it is not properly normalized or that sort of a thing. So it results in like heavy queries. So n+1 queries are very common. So like I have fixed a few websites where people used to have for billing list. Okay, so what they used to do is you could simply do a join, okay, using with count or that sort of a thing. So instead of that, what people were doing, they were getting a list of bill. Okay, so they were getting the bill from the bill table. Okay, and then on that they were iterating using a for each. Okay, so on that bill they used to take some items table and iterate that, and then they used to add to get a grand total or that sort of a thing. So in that there was a reporting part which I had to fix. So in that reporting they were doing something like 3000 queries. Okay, due to the iterative part which I told you, which is caused due to the n+1 query problem. So in this all problems we will be seeing in detail how these things affect your performance and how do we fix it. But just to give you a gist of it, so there was an issue. They were doing 3000 queries for something that could be done in 2 to 3 queries. So their time was 2 minutes and some 3 seconds for loading the page. And on that top of that, they had something called the data tables using JavaScript. Okay, the older data tables, so you couldn't defer the rendering as well in that. So that had important effect on it. And when I reduced the query load and I used, it was partly an ORM thing and partly this thing, raw query. So I fixed that part and did it into a complete single joined query, and that solved it, and we were able to get the data, complete data, in 400 milliseconds or that sort of a thing. Okay, so that is how n+1 query problem is affecting lot of Laravel projects. So it is very common problem across all the projects, because people use ORM in the first place, but they don't use it properly. It's just that they do it in a quick way. So ORM is not a quick fix sort of a thing. It needs careful understanding of the problem. So that is something people need to work on. Then the most important aspect that I see is not using queues. Okay, so Laravel has an excellent queuing mechanism. Okay, and through that you could uh, club it with events, or you could have sort of cron jobs sort of a thing, and you could do certain things. Okay, so those things you could do with queues. Okay, so queues really come handy, because instead of doing things in a synchronous fashion, you could do it in a asynchronous way. Okay, so yeah, sending emails is there, and then there's heavy render jobs. Okay, so in some projects where you are like rendering a PDF or that sort of a report or that sort of thing, so you are generating a heavy report of like daily sales report could be, or you could say a weekly report or that sort of a thing. So these kind of things, if you are generating on the go, then they will be quite a headache for the Laravel setup. So that is why you could dispatch those jobs to the queues. Okay, so this we could do a really good example in upcoming videos. So this is very important aspect, and this I have seen has improved the performance of Laravel setups, you could say. So I remember in one of my old projects also, so we had built this thing, report generator. It used to trigger, you could say, at a certain time like 9 or 10 p.m., and it used to send reports for the sales report for the complete day. So their day cycle was like 9 to 9. Okay, and 10 o'clock it used to generate reports. So at that time they didn't have any load as such, but the thing was, most of the distributors, my clients distributors or that sort of thing, so they were actually working on getting the data. Okay, so each one of them was at the same time trying to fetch their regional reports. So this project was running across India, so like 24 or 22 states this thing was running across. So that is why there was a heavy load on this thing. So on the database side of things also, we needed to build a read replica and that sort of thing for this thing. But apart from that, I fixed it by what you call outsourcing the print, or you could say the generation of the PDF to the Java side of things. So instead of using the Laravel library for the report generation and stuff, I simply used a job which sent all the printing information to this different Java application which use Apache PDF box to generate the PDF, and after generating the PDF, it sent a webhook or that sort of a thing to my Laravel setup, and then it used to dispatch the report directly on the mail. Okay, through Laravel only, but that too again using a queue. So that was yet another interesting project that we had. So we'll similarly try to emulate that sort of a scenario for this thing. Okay, definitely. Then one of the most important aspect is not using Laravel Octane. Okay, so what happens is, like, for every request, usually without Octane, okay, if you call or request any page from Laravel, it starts directly from the bootstrap page. Okay, so that means is like it will create, if you're using a database also, in that it will create a database connection as well every time it spawns. Okay, apart from that, it will create a new PHP process. So traditionally we use fast CGI manager, okay, along with this. So FPM is used, basically process manager, for that, in conjunction with Apache web server or Nginx, that sort of a thing. And in modern times you could simply use Octane, okay, which itself is a you could say application server. Okay, and it has like different, what you call, uh, plugabilities in that sort of. It uses Swool, like it can, you can optionally use it with Swool, then Franken PHP and that sort of a thing, and that speeds up your application, because what it does is it will not relaunch Laravel at every request. Okay, so that really saves a lot of time, because Laravel is a very heavy framework in itself. It comes with a lot of features which help in increasing the productivity of the developers, but yes, it is very heavy. So that is why using Octane is really important. Okay, so like it is mentioned here, 2 to 3x faster boot times. Okay, because it's not loading the complete framework, there's an in-app copy of the thing running into the RAM, so that is what is used. Okay, but apart from this, simply using Octane will not give you a peak performance. Okay, so what you need to do is, along with this, you need to have connection pooling as well. Okay, so what do you mean by connection pooling? So the databases that we use, like MySQL, Postgres, or any sort of a database, so for making connection to that database, you need connection objects, or you could say a pathway that could connect to the database. So each time, if you are building a bridge or a pathway to connect to your database, that is time consuming. So like it is mentioned here, it is 3 to 10 milliseconds. Okay, so on bigger databases, okay, which are not having sharding or that sort of a thing, you will have this connection time even higher at cases. Okay, so what needs to be done is connection pooling needs to be done. So basically this Laravel uses PDO. Okay, so that in itself needs a setting to be done in a few files in Laravel, not few files, only a single file. Okay, so that you need to do to make sure that apart from using Octane, you have that setting enabled, which allows you to do pooling. Okay, if you do connection pooling, then you don't create new connections and close old connection, which is time consuming and resource consuming as well. At some point you might be out of resources when you have too many requests to serve, and that will give you like too many request error or that sort of thing. Okay, so that is another caveat, or you could say problem for this thing. Okay, and one of the most important points again is bad database schema. So you will club the ORM point with this one, but again these are two different aspects. So like some people use raw queries as well, so in that case also you could have a bad database schema in itself, not using indexes or not having indexes in place. And the most important point in this aspect is people these days are misusing JSON. Okay, or using too many places, or you could say too much of JSON in places for all sort of things. So like if you want to have a CMS, like people would have complete sections stored into this JSONs, okay, like images or that sort of a thing. So even if from the backend you're changing those things, so you have to write complex queries for the updation of this JSON, and in the real time also when the website is running and showing all these images, it is doing complex query work for every render or that sort of a thing. So that is another problem. Not having indexes or missing indexes usually means bad performance. Okay, so bad performance of the queries, okay, because it is not indexed. And then finally, overusing of polymorphic relations. So that means you have too many queries firing up on a single table. Okay, so for this I'll give you a very small example. So now consider we are building a social media. Okay, so I need to fetch comments. So there are two ways to do it. Okay, so one I could do is like my post comments, okay, under my post, and I could have a separate table of image comments. Okay, so if my platform allows me to do posts as well as images, okay, two different things, so I would have two different tables. Okay, and from that I'll be fetching data. That is one way. And if we have to use polymorphic way of things, then we have a single comments table. From that you could fetch both, but in this case what we'll have is simply identifier variable. So like one will be for post comments and two will be for image comments, so that sort of a thing. So in this case, the second case, what happens is like you are putting too much of load on a single table, which is also not really good, and it could slow down your query process as well as the writes, because there is a intermittent locking also between the tuples and all those things, where offered by a vendor to keep the consistency of your database. So it messes up with all those things. Okay, and finally the point which I already mentioned, your schema is not designed properly. Your schema should be built with proper, you could say, RDBMS rules. Okay, the normalization rules and all those things, and not simply just the way how you want to design your ORM or that sort of a thing. Okay, so it needs to come from the data oriented point of view and not the object oriented point of view. Okay, so again, like I said, it is a impedance mismatch problem in these cases. Okay, so let's not get into that debate. So here's, I've just simply summarized all these things. Okay, hopefully it was a good experience for you guys to learn these things, or probably you guys are already aware of these things. Okay, yeah, thank you.